$514 billion. That's how much the U.S. Department of the Treasury was forced to borrow in Q2 2025 to cover the massive gap caused by China's dumping of $1.7 trillion in U.S. Treasury bonds. And what's even more alarming? The U.S. dollar lost nearly 9% of its value immediately after that retreat. China's shocking counterstrike. Overnight, what once seemed unthinkable became reality. China didn't just pull out of the U.S. bond market, it did so at lightning speed. Roughly $1.7 trillion in Treasury bonds were dumped in quick succession. This came immediately after the U.S. government ordered banking giants, J.P. Morgan and Bank of America, to withdraw from a $5 billion IPO of a leading Chinese EV battery company. The reason? National security concerns and Beijing's rapid rise in strategic technology. But the price? Too high. In just one quarter, the Treasury Department had to boost its borrowing plan to a record $514 billion, more than 4 times the original forecast. This is no longer a story of two economies. It's a full-fledged financial war. The domino effect, dollar drops, interest rates. Surge. China's sudden exit from the bond market sent U.S. Treasury yields soaring, which in turn drove up borrowing costs across the board. Whether buying a house, a car, or paying tuition, Americans are now paying the highest interest rates in years. And the impact? Inflation hit 3.4% in Q1 2025, up 1.2 percentage points from the previous quarter. Rising energy and food prices are eroding the earnings of millions of households, especially low and middle-income families. Consumer confidence plunged to its lowest level since 1952, a glaring sign that fear is spreading about America's economic future. Global investors flee. It wasn't just China. Japan, Germany, and Saudi Arabia also began unloading U.S. bonds simultaneously. In total, $317 billion in U.S. assets were pulled out in just Q1, marking the largest dump since 2016. Meanwhile, Asian IPOs in the U.S. took a nosedive. The percentage of Asian firms choosing to list in the U.S. dropped from 75% to just 28% over the past 3 years. This doesn't only affect foreign firms. It undermines the global appeal of America's capital markets. At the same time, the U.S. Congress ordered giant investment firms like BlackRock and Vanguard to divest $812 billion from over 220 Chinese companies, fueling a growing sense of financial instability. China and BRICS restructure the global financial system. As the U.S. uses financial tools to exert pressure, China isn't sitting idle. Beijing has accelerated its de-dollarization strategy through several bold moves, reducing its U.S. bond holdings to $759 billion, the lowest in 9 years. Boosting its gold reserves to 2,292 tons, equivalent to 6.5% of its total FX reserves. Investing more in BRICS internal bonds and yuan-denominated assets. But that's not all. China announced it would launch its own national credit rating system by 2026, aimed at breaking away from Western agencies like Moody's and Fitch. Simultaneously, the BRICS alliance is expanding its payment system, BRICS Pay, enabling cross-border trade in local currencies. In just Q1 2025, it processed $56.4 billion in transactions, with nearly half conducted. Will the U.S. revise its policies? Will it dial back financial weaponization to keep allies close? Or will it double down, while the rest of the world quietly shifts toward a new financial order where the dollar is no longer central? The answer won't come from fiery speeches. It will be revealed through real policies, interest rate decisions, investment rules, and how America handles its strategic partners. Because every passing minute, every signal sent, is another dollar, another job, another American savings account being wagered in this unprecedented financial conflict.
China has suspended $10 billion worth of goods, causing a 47% disruption in the flow of goods between the U.S. and China. This not only causes car prices and iPhones to soar, but also makes shipping costs skyrocket. Can American consumers handle these changes in the global supply chain? The supply chain is facing significant shocks, with the aviation and automotive industries being hit the hardest. Boeing, a symbol of American aviation, has suspended 84 orders worth $28.4 billion. This not only causes massive financial losses, but also directly affects key international contracts, diminishing the US's competitiveness in the aviation market. But it's not just Boeing. The automotive industry is also struggling. The Ford Mustang Mach-E has raised prices by $1,200, while Stellantis has increased the cost of their plug-in hybrid cars by up to 7%. The shortage of parts and production delays are disrupting the assembly lines, and the cost of making cars is only going to increase. These changes mean consumers will have to pay more for the products they love, and many may not be able to afford them. On April 19, 2025, China suspended $10 billion of goods at the Shanghai ports, causing a 47% congestion in the flow of goods between the US and China. The impact of this disruption is spreading across the global supply chain, from the electronics industry to the automobile sector. iPhone deliveries, a popular consumer item, may be delayed by up to 2 months. Furthermore, car prices could rise by an additional $2,000 due to the shortage of parts and products. The rise in goods prices is creating a spending crisis for American consumers, with everything becoming more expensive. This shift is pushing the economy into an unstable position, with the cost of living climbing and showing no signs of slowing down. China's ports have been facing severe congestion, with 47% of the goods unable to leave the docks. This has forced producers to cancel or alter their existing contracts. This situation is causing a series of consequences, increasing shipping costs and making it difficult to determine product pricing. Shipping container costs from China to the US have surged by 250%. And this cost increase is not only hitting large businesses, but also pushing consumers into a difficult spot. Shipping companies and manufacturers are struggling to maintain stability in an environment full of risk and constantly changing prices. In light of supply chain issues and rising production costs, Tesla and Toyota have decided to shift some production to Mexico and Berlin. However, this is not an easy fix. While it may reduce dependence on Chinese ports, it comes with higher production costs and production delays. American automakers are not only facing increased costs, but also struggling to maintain production stability as the global supply chain becomes increasingly unreliable. American consumers will face continued price hikes for cars due to rising production and transportation costs. However, manufacturers can't provide stable products, leading to a shortage in the automobile market and uncertainty about prices. Major companies like Tesla and Toyota are not only shifting production to Mexico and Berlin, but also looking to expand into new markets to reduce reliance on China. But this is no easy task. Mexico and Southeast Asian countries have lower labor costs, but lack the infrastructure and production capacity of China. This will lead to higher production costs and add complexity to supply chain management. Nonetheless, this shift could create opportunities for developing countries like Mexico, Vietnam, and India to expand manufacturing and attract companies moving their supply chains. In just 72 hours, China canceled 2.4 million tons of soybeans from the United States. That's over $1.1 billion vanished from America's trade balance. Was this just another move in the tariff war? Or is it a test run for something much bigger? A world where the US dollar might no longer be the center of gravity? In early April 2025, Bloomberg reported that China canceled all soybean orders from Cargill, ADM, and Bunge, 3 of the largest agricultural exporters in the US. More than 40 ships already at sea were ordered to change direction. The Chicago market reacted fast. Soybean prices dropped 8.2% in just 1 week. It brought back echoes of the 2018 trade war, when China imposed 25% tariffs on US soybeans, slashing exports by over 70%. But this time, Beijing said nothing. No press conference, no tweet. Just an ominous silence, as if to say, we can change the rules whenever we want. According to the USDA, soybean stockpiles in the US jumped 13%, hitting their highest level since 2019. In farming states like Iowa and Illinois, worry spread fast. A farmer in Des Moines, quoted in the Wall Street Journal, said, "The market disappeared so fast. We didn't have time to react." The American Soybean Association warned that farm income could drop by 18% this quarter alone. That hits over 11 Midwestern states right in the budget. The USDA is reportedly considering emergency relief, while also seeking new buyers in India and Europe, markets that had stepped in during the last US-China tensions. While American farmers panicked, Brazil stepped up. From 2020 to 2024, Brazil expanded soybean farmland by 21%, backed by over $11 billion in infrastructure loans, mainly from Chinese development banks. Ports like Santos were expanded. The Ferroground Railway cut delivery times from deep inland farms to ports from weeks to days. Even Brazilian media call this the railway built by China for China. The result? China immediately replaced its 2.4 million tons of US soybeans with Brazilian crops, even paying $14 to $22 more per ton. This wasn't reaction. This was preparation. In the first quarter of 2025, US agricultural exports to China dropped 26%, a loss of over $3.2 billion, according to the Department of Commerce. At the same time, China signed long-term grain deals with Brazil, Argentina, Russia, and Pakistan, covering 70% of its import needs. Some experts are asking, is this just about soybeans? Or is it a signal that China is moving away from the US altogether, in agriculture and in global finance? Fact is, China has already cut its US Treasury holdings from over $1.1 trillion in 2017 to just around $800 billion by late 2023. No one's saying Beijing will ditch the dollar tomorrow, but the pattern is raising questions, big ones. Because when one canceled crop can shake trade, finance, and global confidence, you have to wonder, what happens when the next cancellation isn't about soybeans at all? The $43 billion aircraft order could be canceled, and the impact doesn't stop at Ryanair or Boeing. It leads to higher ticket prices, more expensive goods, and harder to get electric cars, all the burdens falling squarely on US consumers. Price increases. Who's paying the price? The 25% tariffs on imports from China are creating a widespread wave of price hikes in everyday American life. A TV is now $200 more. A box of butter has gone up by $2. Clothing, shoes, electronics, and essential consumer products all are rising by 5% to 20%. Inflation in 2025 has hit 4%, pushing average monthly living costs up by $150. For high-income households, this might not seem significant, but for low-income families, that's a week's worth of groceries or half a month's travel expenses. The impact of tariffs doesn't stop at the supermarket. It's spreading across the supply chain, forcing businesses to raise prices to cover import costs. And in the end, the ones bearing the brunt are the consumers. Americans are paying more for the same lifestyle, with fewer choices available. Airline Crisis, the $43 billion threat. Ryanair, Europe's largest airline, has warned it will cancel an order for 210 Boeing aircraft worth $43.2 billion if the US imposes tariffs on the aviation industry. Aircraft prices will rise, pushing operating costs higher, which will increase ticket prices by 5% to 10%. Ryanair's low-cost model is under threat. Cheap tickets will disappear, flight frequencies will decrease, and many international routes may be delayed or cut. To ease cost pressures, Ryanair is considering switching to Chinese-made aircraft, which are 20% cheaper, but they are not yet certified for operation in Europe, posing significant risks. This issue isn't limited to Ryanair alone. Xiamen Airlines from China has returned at least 3 737 MAX 8 planes due to US tariffs, causing many international flights to be delayed, making it harder for passengers to plan and increasing flight costs. Ryanair, Xiamen, and even Air India are all putting significant pressure on Boeing, and throughout this entire crisis, consumers are the first to bear the consequences. Declining sales and rising car prices, Tesla losing ground. In April 2025, Tesla's electric vehicle sales in Europe plummeted, down 60% in France and 67% in Denmark. This situation has impacted global supply, driving up car prices and limiting options. Consumers now have to accept higher prices or turn to competitors like Volkswagen, Nissan, or BYD. But these alternatives are not cheaper, and service remains inconsistent. At the same time, Tesla showrooms in Europe are facing continuous protests and vandalism. The company is being forced to scale back operations, reducing the number of models available, making it harder for consumers to find electric cars that meet their needs and budgets. Shopping woes when consumers lose their choices. Air India has temporarily suspended new orders from Boeing due to uncertainty over delivery schedules. The fleet modernization is delayed, directly affecting the plans to operate international flight routes. Passengers now face the possibility of flight delays or being forced to switch to other airlines with available fleets. In Europe, if Ryanair cancels its Boeing orders, the consequences will spread even further. Fewer airplanes mean fewer flights, and cheap tickets, one of Ryanair's hallmarks, will become scarce. Consumers will be forced to pay higher prices for tickets or wait longer to travel. Tesla losing trust. Politics hits consumers. In April 2025, Tesla saw a sharp decline in sales, down 60% in France and 67% in Denmark. Political boycotts, protests, and vandalism have caused consumers to lose trust. Tesla is no longer the top choice. Buyers are turning to brands like Volkswagen or BYD, but prices are high and supply is limited. Trust has collapsed, choices are shrinking. Consumers continue to bear the brunt. 53% of China's international transactions are now settled in yuan. The US dollar has hit a 3-year low, and prices for essential goods in the US have surged up to 15% in just 6 months. Is the dollar's global dominance quietly slipping away while most Americans remain unaware? The shift in global currency begins. For decades, the US dollar has been the bedrock of global trade. But that may be changing. China has become the top trading partner for more than 120 countries, with a total trade volume of $6.1 trillion, surpassing the US at $5.3 trillion. However, it's not just about the goods, it's about the currency. In a recent directive, China's central bank instructed its state-owned companies to prioritize the use of the yuan, RMB, in international trade. As a result, the share of US dollar usage in transactions with China has dropped from 83% to 43% within just a few years. This is more than symbolic. For instance, China and Saudi Arabia recently closed an energy deal denominated in yuan, a move that signals growing confidence in alternative financial systems. A declining dollar and rising consumer costs. This shift is already affecting American households. A smartphone that cost $800 last year may now sell for $940. Basic imported goods, such as clothing or electronics, are seeing price hikes of 10 to 15%. These increases are not solely driven by supply chain issues. They are compounded by the weakening dollar and rising tariffs on imported goods, particularly from China. To manage market instability, interest rates have been lowered, but this has further weighed on the dollar. As a result, American consumers are absorbing higher costs across the board, even as incomes remain flat. Will the traditional model of American consumption continue if everyday goods become less affordable? Consumer spending slows, economic pressures build. Recent economic indicators reveal early signs of strain. New orders for U.S. businesses have dropped by 22%. Exports fell nearly 28%. Consumer confidence has weakened significantly. This creates a challenging feedback loop. As prices rise, spending slows. Businesses respond with layoffs. Incomes fall. And spending contracts further. Many small enterprises are scaling back, while households begin cutting non-essential expenses. The ripple effects extend beyond individual homes. impacting broader economic stability. With demand falling and prices rising, can the economy sustain its current path? A new global system takes shape. This is not a temporary trend. It may signal a long-term realignment. China is expanding its international payment system called CIPS, designed to operate independently of traditional US-led financial channels. By integrating technologies like blockchain, this system aims to provide a secure, sanctions-resistant alternative for cross-border trade. If more countries begin trading in yuan, the global demand for US dollars will gradually decline. There will be less need to hold US Treasury bonds or use the dollar as a medium of exchange. And as global finance diversifies away from a single currency, the impact will be felt first by American consumers through the price tags on store shelves. Can a nation remain a global economic leader if its currency is no longer the preferred choice for trade? $20,000 in extra costs just from tariffed imports, 135% tax on US soybeans, and 170% duties slapped on US pork. This is no longer speculation. It's reality, dragging American agriculture to the brink, from backbone to obstacle. In the past, agricultural exports were a cornerstone of America's trade balance. Soybeans, corn, pork, and dairy, products that fed billions, used to be shipped across the globe from ports in Louisiana, Houston, and Long Beach. But now, over 95% of those orders have silently disappeared. The reason? Not climate, not pests, but something invisible: tariffs. As trade tensions rose between the US and China, both sides escalated. China imposed 125% duties on American goods. The US responded with 145% on Chinese exports. But the impact didn't stop at the border. It struck deep into rural America. Higher prices, shut doors, lost markets. One of the clearest examples: soybeans. China, once the largest buyer, has now turned to Brazil. With a 135% tariff, American soy is simply too expensive to compete, and instead of waiting for change, China locked in multi-year contracts with Brazil. The result? Iowa farmers say the market is lost and won't be coming back. Pork followed a similar path. With 170% tariffs, US pork is now unviable in China. Orders disappeared and competitors like Europe and New Zealand stepped in immediately. Meanwhile, consumers at home gain nothing. Prices rise, but farmers' income drops. The real cost isn't just tariffs, it's lost opportunity. When farmers become silent victims, input costs are surging too. Fertilizers, seeds, chemicals, diesel, all imported. A New York dairy farm reported a $20,000 increase in feed and fertilizer alone. In Illinois, farmers gave up crop rotation. They planted corn only because soy was too volatile. In Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, dairy producers watched export markets to China collapse entirely and the dominoes fall. New equipment isn't bought. Farmland isn't rented. Rural banks are facing default. In North Dakota, a grain elevator shut down for the first time in 40 years. In Minnesota, mental health clinics for farmers are overwhelmed because for many, the farm isn't just a job, it's a family legacy. While America waits, the world moves on. What's worse is the slow response. Farmers demand tariff relief, renewed trade talks, but they don't trust bailouts. They remember what happened last time: delayed payments, red tape, forms piled up, and while America hesitates, others are advancing. Brazil builds inland ports, expands railways for faster soybean exports. New Zealand and Australia sign fresh meat and dairy trade pacts with Asia. India starts shipping cheap rice and cotton to Africa and Southeast Asia. Even smaller countries like Vietnam are locking down contracts for coffee and fruits with Europe. These aren't temporary replacements. They're long-term relationships. Why is that dangerous? Because in global trade, trust and consistency matter more than price. Once that trust is lost, buyers rarely come back. 71,000 containers stuck at ports. $28.4 billion in Boeing's market capitalization evaporated in just 48 hours. And this is just the beginning of the global shock called the US-China trade war. Ports are gridlocked. Retail is paralyzed. In early April 2025, the US announced a 145% tariff on over $300 billion worth of imports from China. In just 3 days, exports from China to the US dropped by 47%. In Shanghai, Ningbo, and Shenzhen, containers piled up. More than 71,000 containers were stuck. In California, 27 cargo ships waited offshore, with unloading times stretching to 96 hours, matching the record set during COVID. Container shipping costs surged from $1,950 to $6,820, a 250% increase in just 1 year. 10 days. Shipping companies began canceling contracts mid-route, citing unpredictable pricing due to sudden policy changes. Amazon, the e-commerce giant, canceled shipments on their way. Five Below, the discount retail chain, canceled $67 million worth of orders, equivalent to 11% of their Q2 inventory. China's retaliation, precise and quiet. On April 3, 2025, China quietly issued an order to halt all Boeing aircraft deliveries. No announcements, no arguments. In just 48 hours, Boeing lost $28.4 billion in market capitalization. 787 and 787 Dreamliner deliveries expected in Q2 and Q3 were all postponed. According to Bloomberg, this was a precise strike at America's #1 export symbol. Meanwhile, Airbus benefited. Shares rose 11.2% in Frankfurt as China redirected orders. This is no longer just trade. It's an attack on a symbol. And Boeing, as the industrial leader, is the most visible target. US auto industry in crisis. From chip shortages to soaring prices. The consequences spread from consumer goods to the US auto industry. Ford had to halt production of the F-150 Lightning, GM cut battery production by 60%, and Stellantis reduced production due to parts shortages. In the second week of April, 41,000 vehicles remained unfinished, resulting in over $1.6 billion in losses. Car prices surged significantly. Stellantis raised hybrid prices by 8%, and Ford increased the Mustang Mach-E price by $1,200. Even used cars saw a 4.1% price increase in just 1 week. The average price of a new car in the US reached $47,770, an increase of $2,600 in April, relocating factories, scarce land, and risks in the shadows. In response, companies began relocating. Tesla moved Model 3 production to Berlin, Toyota reduced chip dependency by 30%, and Stellantis shifted production lines to Mexico. However, these solutions faced barriers. Hong and Cat Lai ports reached 94% capacity. India relies 60% on road transport, and Mexico increased waiting times at the Laredo border crossing to 12.5 hours. Moreover, China tightened exports of rare earths, causing Ford, Lockheed Martin, and Raytheon to experience critical supply shortages. The earliest forecast for alternative sources is late 2026. Meanwhile, China quietly sold US government bonds, reducing its holdings to the lowest level since 2011.